RUSI New South Wales is an independent, apolitical, not-for-profit public education institute that, since 1888, has been promoting informed debate on and enhancing public awareness and understanding of defence and national security issues. We are Australia's oldest think tank. We conduct monthly lectures and seminars, issue a monthly newsletter, provide research support through our extensive military and historical library located in the Anzac Memorial in Sydney's Hyde Park, and together with RUSI Australia, publish a national quarterly magazine called United Service, with informed articles addressing the latest defence and security issues.
Please note, this monthly update presents the geostrategic situation as at the 10th of July, 2025. As often with these rapidly changing events, the monthly update can be out of date by the time the podcast is released. Israel-Iran 12-Day War by David Leese. The various ongoing conflicts in the Middle East in June were all overshadowed by an intense drone, missile and bombing conflict between Israel and Iran, to which the United States made a culminating contribution. Conducted between 13 to 24 June, it has been dubbed the 12-Day War. Israel launched the war on the 13th of June when it conducted a multi-pronged surprise attack on Iran. It damaged or destroyed Iran's air defenses and some of its military and nuclear facilities, and it quickly gained air supremacy over the Iranian Air Force. Israel used the just-released 2025 annual report of the International Atomic Energy Agency as a pretext. The report had highlighted several examples of Iranian non-compliance with its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel also cited estimates that Iran had accumulated sufficient enriched uranium to enable it to manufacture about a dozen nuclear weapons within a short time frame. Israel, therefore, launched a preemptive attack to destroy Iran's nuclear weapon manufacturing capability. Israel's attack had been long in planning. It had pre-positioned Mossad, intelligence agents and special forces in Iran, together with drones and short-range missiles. On the 13th of June, these commando units and Mossad agents assassinated some 30 prominent government and military officials, including the chief of the general staff and the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and 11 leading nuclear scientists. President Trump, however, is said to have forbidden Israel from assassinating the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, who subsequently went into hiding for the duration of the conflict. In the following 11 days, Israel launched some 900 airstrikes on Iranian cities and military targets, especially on its key uranium enrichment facilities at Fordow, Natanz and Isfahan. Iran responded with waves of missile and drone strikes on Israeli military sites and cities, particularly Haifa, Tel Aviv and Beersheba. Jerusalem also was struck. Over 550 ballistic missiles and more than 1,000 explosive drones were fired by Iran at Israel. Iran-aligned Houthis in Yemen also fired several missiles at Israel. Israel, however, was unable to destroy the uranium enrichment facilities at Fordow, which were deep underground. President Trump agreed to assist Israel, and on day 9 of the war, the 21st of June, 7 United States B-2 stealth bombers dropped 14 precision, bunker-busting bombs GBU, 57 massive ordnance penetrators down ventilation shafts at the Fordow facility and also struck the Natanz facility, while a United States submarine in the Persian Gulf fired some 24 cruise missiles at the Isfahan site. In total, 75 precision-guided weapons were used during the operation. Subsequently, in a largely face-saving gesture flagged well in advance, Iran retaliated by firing a few missiles at the United States military base in Qatar, only causing minor damage. On the 24th of June, at the insistence of President Trump, Israel and Iran agreed to an immediate ceasefire. Despite a somewhat wobbly start, to date it has held. Casualties of the 12-day war included 29 Israelis killed and 38 wounded, and 935 Iranians killed and 4,746 wounded. Extensive physical damage was caused to both Israeli and Iranian cities and towns. At the time of writing, the extent of damage to Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities remains unclear. The United States claims they have been severely damaged. Despite that damage, there is agreement among Western observers that Iran would be able to resume its nuclear program in time should it so wish, but estimates as to how long that would take vary from several months to many years. Since the war, Iran has denied inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency access to its nuclear sites and has indicated that it may withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Gaza. By David Leese. Over the past month, the counter-guerrilla war in Gaza has continued unabated. Israel mainly has used precision airstrikes and artillery fire to kill Hamas fighters and destroy Hamas headquarters and infrastructure, which are mostly sited in built-up areas. Consequently, civilian casualties have continued to mount and hospitals, schools and other public facilities have been further damaged or destroyed. Most focus has been on two issues: food and aid distribution and peace talks. Food and aid distribution. In May, Israel strengthened the blockade of Gaza and brought an end to food distribution by United Nations, UN, and other humanitarian agencies operating in the Gaza Strip. In their place, it introduced a new aid distribution agency, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHF. The GHF is a new U.S. and Israel-backed initiative designed to deliver humanitarian aid directly to Palestinian civilians, while keeping that aid out of the hands of terrorists. The GHF, however, lacked the capacity and local knowledge and expertise to do the job effectively, and hunger intensified among the civilian population. Masses of starving civilians queued at the few GHF distribution points in southern Gaza each morning, and IDF troops, possibly fearing being overwhelmed, opened fire on the crowd on several occasions. The food and aid distribution packages distributed by the GHF were of a good standard, but civilian casualties mounted and hunger spread. It was an inauspicious start for the new aid distribution system, which could not cope with the demand. Peace talks. Under increased pressure from President Trump to end the war, Israeli and Palestinian negotiators met in Qatar during June ahead of a planned meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump on the 8th of July. It is understood that the negotiators developed a proposal for a 60-day ceasefire. Hamas would release 10 of the remaining 20 living hostages and hand over 18 bodies of the 30 remaining dead hostages. The IDF would withdraw to a buffer zone along Gaza's borders with Israel and Egypt. There would be an increase in aid distribution by UN agencies and the Palestinian Red Crescent. The GHF was not mentioned. Some more Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails would be released in exchange for the released hostages, but the number is yet to be determined. At the time of writing, the 9th of July, Hamas is understood to be willing to agree to the ceasefire on condition that negotiations towards a permanent ceasefire continue during the 60-day truce, and that President Trump guarantees that Israel will not recommence the war while the talks continue. Benjamin Netanyahu, though, said after his meeting with President Trump on the 8th of July that he would not end the war until Israel had eliminated Hamas military and governing power. Netanyahu also again raised the matter of resettling Palestinians after the war in neighboring countries and said President Trump would discuss this possibility with Iran in upcoming talks. Given the intransigent positions on both sides, the war may have a long while to run yet. West Bank. By David Leese. Israel's firm control of the West Bank has become even stronger as key right-wing members of the Israeli cabinet, including the security minister, encourage Israelis to take up cheap land on the West Bank. Hence, the slow but inexorable advance by Israeli settlers into the West Bank, illegal under international law, continues apace and, during the past month, several new outposts were established by more militant settlers on high ground overlooking Palestinian farms and villages. Such outposts frequently develop into new Israeli villages at the expense of nearby Palestinian settlements. Also, several raids by settlers on Palestinian olive groves and vegetable gardens and harassment of Palestinian homes were reported. Clashes with Palestinian youth inevitably followed. Israeli police and the IDF usually either stand aside and not interfere or side with the settlers. The opportunity for a two-state solution to the Israel-Palestine question recedes as the Israeli settlements expand and the possibility of a permanent peace with it. Russo-Ukrainian War by David Leese. There is still no end in sight to the Russo-Ukrainian War. Ukraine, having been invaded by Russia in 2014 and again in 2022, is unwilling to cede any of its sovereign territory to Russia, whereas Russia is demanding a resolution of the underlying issues that it says led to the war in the first place, namely NATO's eastward expansion towards and up to the international borders of the Russian Federation. More immediately, it seeks the demilitarization of Ukraine and regime change there. The United States is the key to resolving the issue as it is the only nation with the military resources of ammunition and material to keep Ukraine in the war. Ukraine's European allies, while promising support, lack the military-industrial capacity to sustain the fighting which has been ongoing continuously at various levels of intensity for over 11 years. With wavering among some NATO members, Britain and France are seeking to develop a coalition of the willing to support Ukraine, especially to provide peacekeepers in Ukraine should a peace treaty be signed, but the coalition is slow in getting underway. Now well into the fourth year of continuous heavy fighting since the 2022 invasion, Ukraine is struggling with recruiting frontline fighters and sustaining the levels of artillery, air defense and small arms ammunition needed at current rates of usage. This is despite its cutting-edge scientific and technological innovation and local manufacture of missiles and drones, of which it is now a world leader. In early July, the U.S. Defense Department again paused shipments of arms and ammunition to Ukraine. President Trump, however, after speaking to President Putin by telephone for an hour on the 7th of July and faced with Putin's intransigence on peace negotiations, Trump said he was not happy with Putin and that Ukraine was being hit very hard. President Trump reversed the decision. Russia immediately retaliated and targeted Ukraine with a record 728 drones overnight. The U.S. is now discussing providing Ukraine with additional Patriot missiles and air defense systems. Turning now to the fighting itself, Russia continues to hold the upper hand, but its spring-summer offensive is making slow progress. Both sides are placing increased emphasis on missile and drone attacks on the opponent's cities and strategic infrastructure. Since early May, Russia has substantially increased the tempo of its now nightly drone and missile strikes on Ukrainian cities and continues to expand its domestic drone production, enabling intensified drone employment in tactical frontline operations and nightly long-range strikes on Ukrainian cities. All along the front line, Ukraine has established close drone surveillance to a depth of 15 kilometers, enabling artillery and drone strikes on advancing Russian forces, whether in small groups or larger formations. Russian progress is largely dependent on electronic jamming of the Ukrainian drones. Ukraine's 7-month cross-border incursion from its Sumy Oblast into Russia's Kursk Oblast, which began on the 6th of August, 2024 and at its peak had seized over 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory, had ended by the 16th of March, 2025. The last Ukrainian forces withdrew from Kursk Oblast to new defensive positions along the Sumy-Kursk border. Since then, there has been continuing skirmishing along the border, and in late May, early June Russian forces penetrated into Sumy Oblast at numerous places. Over the past month, Ukrainian forces have launched a series of counterattacks against Russian forces in northern Sumy Oblast and have regained some territory. Ukrainian forces also invaded Belgorod Oblast in March-April and now hold some isolated pockets along the international border. As to the fighting along the 1,000 kilometers front line in eastern and southern Ukraine, by early June, Russia's spring-summer offensive had made some progress. While each side was making marginal tactical gains at various places, overall, the Russians had the better of the fighting and were expanding the amount of territory they control. On the eastern axis, Luhansk Oblast is largely in Russian hands and Russian forces are now penetrating westwards across the Luhansk-Kharkiv border into Kharkiv Oblast. In Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces recently advanced westwards beyond Chasiv Yar and Toretsk. They have continued to advance slowly westwards to the strategic city of Pokrovsk and, to the south of the city, have crossed the Donetsk-Dnipropetrovsk Oblast border. While Russian forces have closed up to Pokrovsk from the south, there is a tactical stalemate around the city which is not cut off and remains in Ukrainian hands. The Russian advance to and beyond Pokrovsk is the most notable change in control of the front line in Donetsk for several months, but analysts say innovative tactics by Ukrainian forces, combining the use of drones and ground forces, have inflicted significant losses on Russian forces and slowed their offensive. On the southern axis, Russian forces have focused largely on maintaining their frontline positions in Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblasts, with their main offensive operations continuing to be in western Zaporizhia, where they continue to assault using small infantry groups together with motorcycle teams. They employ a wave tactic, sending 4 to 5 motorcycles to find gaps in Ukrainian defenses and then follow up with dismounted infantry to consolidate positions. Russia now holds some 3/4 of Zaporizhia, and Ukrainian military analysts estimate that the Russians have accumulated as many as 70,000 troops along the Zaporizhia front, plus hundreds of tanks and artillery guns. Yemen. By David Deasy. Recent Middle East conflicts and the consequent flow-on of American airstrikes against Iran's nuclear facilities have overshadowed activities around the Horn of Africa. The problems of the Houthis and of maritime piracy have not gone away, and Australia's decision not to provide a warship looks increasingly questionable. This decision was based on an assumption that both the Houthis and piracy were contained without the RAN needing to send a ship. This assessment is increasingly questionable, and the environment is deteriorating rapidly. The Houthis backed by Iran are in a position to act as proxies while Iran ponders its future moves. The impact of the Houthis on world trade is well documented, with some authorities assessing that their actions contribute up to a 5% on cost for goods landed in Australia, and therefore this is an Australian cost of living component, as shippers are avoiding routes through the Suez Canal. It is clear that the Houthis are a well-organized and financed group with growing military and technological sophistication. On the 27th of June, as Israel and Iran entered a truce, the Houthis recommenced missile attacks on Israel. The effectiveness is not the real issue, it is the psychological pressure that they keep on the Israeli population, which is critical. Many of the missiles used are being produced in Yemen using at least some externally sourced components, especially from Iran and China. Now new concerns are being raised about the group, with it having increasingly close and warming ties with the Al-Shabaab terrorist group in Somalia. The 6th of February, 2025 report by the United Nations called attention to the flow of weapons from Yemen to Al-Shabaab. The UN assessed that these weapons provided increased sophistication to the terrorist group and had been used against African Union Transition Mission forces in September and November 2024. The Somali president himself drew attention to the proliferation in numbers and sophistication of weapons that Al-Shabaab was receiving, including weaponized drones and surface-to-air missiles. It, however, is not a one-way issue. The Somali coast is porous with insufficient sea and air assets to properly patrol it. Iranian and Chinese equipment is landed on the coast and transshipped to Yemen by Al-Shabaab, avoiding Allied naval patrols. This keeps the Houthi missile industry viable. Al-Shabaab is also said to be providing local intelligence on both terrain and foreign military forces, as well as imparting their knowledge of piracy. It is said that in 2024, a dozen Al-Shabaab operatives were sent to Yemen for technical and tactical training in drone warfare. It is now believed that the Houthis have established a presence in Somalia, masquerading as Al-Shabaab, and have established missile development and perhaps manufacturing facilities in the Golis Mountains in Somalia. This northern area is increasingly a no-go area for both government forces and UN, African Union. A missile test in the area recently reportedly saw a missile fly a distance of 459 kilometers. Not only is this a growing instability for Somalia after decades of civil war, but has global implications. Ultimately, it could lead to merchant ships being attacked by missiles and pirates from both sides of the Gulf of Aden. This is likely to bring all maritime commerce to a halt, and while military vessels could still operate, the threat would increase exponentially. The pirates will likely access explosive drone boats and seaborne missiles to take on foreign warships. As a result, United States Africa Command (AFRICOM) conducted a precision airstrike targeting Al-Shabaab on the 10th of June, approximately 72 kilometers southeast of Bosaso, Puntland, in close coordination with the federal government of Somalia. The mission, executed with no civilian casualties reported, marks the 22nd U.S. airstrike in Somalia this year, signaling a sustained escalation in Washington's counter-terrorism campaign in the Horn of Africa. Al Jazeera, however, claims that there have been 43 strikes by the U.S. in Somalia this year. The targets were described as IS Somalia, the ISIL affiliate in northeast Puntland state, while the remainder targeted Al-Shabaab. India. By David Deasy. India is continuing to develop its strategic plan to provide balance in the Indo-Pacific against growing Chinese influence, and by definition, denying Pakistan any advantage by that association. India has viewed China's penetration into the Indian Ocean area with great concern. In particular, China has made significant investments in Sri Lanka, coupled with its increasing maritime activity in the region. Now an Indian company, Mazagon Dock Shipbuilders Limited, India's largest state-run shipyard, has acquired a controlling 51% interest in Colombo Dockyard plc, Sri Lanka's leading and most established shipyard, from its Japanese owners. The acquisition is seen as significant for India's maritime influence in the region. It is being hailed as a major strategic win for India in its battle for influence against Beijing, and is reinforcing India's strategic interests in the Indian Ocean. India and 10 African countries have completed a first-of-its-kind naval exercise in the Indian Ocean. The 6-day drill, known as the Africa-India Key Maritime Engagement (AKIM), ended April 18. The exercise, co-hosted by the Indian Navy and the Tanzania People's Defence Force, was held at Dar es Salaam. Comoros, Djibouti, Eritrea, Kenya, Madagascar, Mauritius, Mozambique, Seychelles and South Africa also participated in the exercise, which included harbour and port phases. On the political front, a high-level delegation led by India's Defence Minister, Sanjay Seth, visited Madagascar over the period 25 to 27 June. The delegation discussed ways of boosting defence cooperation between the two states. Overall, India still remains unaligned. Many of its defence systems are Russian. It is currently negotiating with Russia for the supply of further Russian S-400 anti-aircraft systems, and is investigating the possible acquisition of the more advanced S-500 system. As well, the announcement on the 27th of June indicated that it would be seeking upgrades for its Su-30 Mki jet fighters as well as other military hardware. In this regard, it is reported that India is exploring the integration of Russian R-37M Axe-head air-to-air missiles into its MiG-29 and Su-30 Mki aircraft fleets. This missile is stated to a range of 300 km and a speed in excess of Mach 6. For its homegrown aircraft, the Tejas Mk1 and Mk1A, it is integrating its next-generation locally designed air-to-air missile, the Astra Mki, said to have a range of 140 to 160 km and is considered similar to the AIM-120D AMRAAM of the U.S. Air Force. Trials are expected to commence in mid-2026. Australia. By John Howells. News media is awash with criticisms of Australia's approach to defence, few solutions other than that we should increase expenditure by buying armaments from overseas, coupled with blaming our government. This is clearly not an effective approach. Australia's strategic situation has developed both gradually and rapidly. It needs considered address. The correct place to start is to consider what we as a nation need to fight for. We have a vast continent filled with natural beauty and mineral resources. A continent husbanded by the original human immigrants for thousands of years with limited, mostly regenerative exploitation. In the last 230 or so years, vast human immigration changed the land. Exploitation of natural resources expanded with technology, and the regenerative nature of that exploitation declined. Nonetheless, the natural beauty remains. Though in some cases violent displacement of the original inhabitants must be acknowledged in full recognition that current generations cannot be held responsible for the actions of their ancestors. This immigrant nation has developed a social structure that is the envy of the world. There are a few with riches, some are poor and suffer disadvantage. Most live well, able to contribute to the broad social fabric whilst supporting and being supported by family and friends. Our system of government, with preferential compulsory voting yielding representative assemblies and competent leaders, is unsurpassed by other nations. State and community welfare supports the disadvantaged and helps with major expenses for all. Yes, immigration has brought overseas conflicts to our shores, but these attrit over time. Today we have the recent Middle East Islamic migrants clashing with the established Australian Jewish community because of overseas conflicts, just as Australian Irish Catholics conflicted with Australian English Protestants in the 1800s and beyond, and Australian Serbs with Australian Croats in the 1990s. In World War II, many service personnel were not sent to fight in Europe and North Africa due to family heritage. Okay for them to fight in the Southwest Pacific. A way of life worth fighting for. So what do we need to prepare to fight? Note I said prepare to fight. The nation able to work as a community to withstand the disaster's nature sends, deter crime and internal conflict whilst appearing costly for an external aggressor to conquer, is a nation that can stand. We are lucky to be far from potential conflicts. Only once, 1942 to 1944, has a foreign aggressor bombed our shore. But that is not to say we are invulnerable. The world has many nations ruled by an individual supported by a close cabal of sycophants on a mission to expand their sphere of influence. The closest to us is China. The People's Liberation Army (PLA) of China has the largest active military force in the world, with approximately 2.04 million personnel. By comparison, the Australian Defence Force (ADF) currently has approximately 84,865 serving members. China, in terms of equipment, has a vast stockpile compared to Australia. In rational terms, China should not be interested in conflict with Australia. Our economies are complementary, not competitive. Australia has a large number of citizens that are of Chinese descent. Chinese cultural practices are respected. Yes, speech and publication thereof criticizing our own and foreign governments is allowed. In our own case, it is encouraged with the view that political debate can result in a better problem solution for the community. China, along with some other nations, most recently the USA, does not allow such criticism, and if you knock the Thai royal family. Criticism made in Australia of China has in the past led to trade sanctions. But war? Well, a nation are ruled by an individual supported by a close cabal of sycophants on a mission to expand their sphere of influence, maybe, has happened in the past. So we should make the nation not worth taking. Could be done by appeasement, implementing measures such as restricting free speech, decoupling international alliances that have served us well in the past, etc. Such measures, however, have the potential to put the nation in a position so weak that all of the other institutions that make Australia the place to be will gradually dissipate. Alternately, our defence measures can be viewed by a potential aggressor as not worth the effort. Worked for Switzerland and Sweden 1939 to 1945. Building a defence capability, however, must be on solid ground. Economically rational globalization has collapsed the manufacturing industry essential for the support of conflict. The fuel essential to sustain the vehicles, air, land and sea essential for conflict would run out in a few days. Our strategic fuel reserves are held on the other side of the world. Even if the USA did not, due to a threat to their homeland, withhold our reserves, they would have to travel here through conflicted waters. We have two small oil refineries, the Ampolitan Refinery in Brisbane and the Viva Energy Refinery in Geelong, incapable of refining locally sourced crude oil. There is the prospect of utilising fuels we can harvest, grow or mine on the continent, and these should be considered. Methanol we already produce and production could be expanded. Natural gas and thermonuclear, raised from the nuclear fusion source 150 million kilometers hence, produced hydrogen can fuel vehicles. Nuclear fission is a bit harder to utilize, rather large to cart around on land, and if static, can be a dangerous target. Buying munitions from overseas can create us a stockpile, but as we have seen in the Ukraine, it does not take long for stockpiles to be exhausted. Australia must be able to produce its own munitions. Fuel and manufacturing shortcomings must be addressed. The strategic fuel reserves need to be moved onshore as a matter of strategic urgency. Yes, there would be a cost, but one able to be offset against potential loss in transit. Most manufacturing moved offshore from the mid-1990s onward due to the fact that Australian workers were paid a living wage as opposed to many overseas barely able to feed their families. Things have changed. Automation had replaced menial human tasks, and artificial intelligence menial human decision-making. One Chinese car manufacturer, Changan, makes 233 cars per worker per year. These are not menial workers, they are programmers and key decision-makers, roles Australians fill well. For us, going into manufacturing is building on a green field or open space. We do not have the old technology and learned practice that disappeared in 2017 when our then government ended carpetbagging GM, Ford and Toyota shutting shop. At the same time, we have the small operations able to be built on. Australian manufacturers produce printed circuit boards, design and produce drone systems and light armoured vehicles. Yes, key items come from overseas, electronic componentry in particular. Everything can be made here, just needs a bit of startup money. Better than gifting our tax dollars overseas. In parallel with laying the industrial foundations for effective defense, a proper threat appreciation needs to be made to determine the weapon systems required, then force numbers and training requirements. Weapon systems need to be next generation. Taking every lesson from current conflicts, then projecting these concepts to the future. Artificial intelligence and remote control systems should be the focus. By comparison to conventional hardware, such systems are cheaper to build and save soldiers, sailors and aviators' lives. Recognize that it is Australia that needs protecting. Yes, we may have to go to the assistance of an offshore friend, but primary focus should be on securing the homeland. Staffing will be a problem, however, if a rational approach that employs within a month rather than a year will go a long way towards solving the problems. And with exciting tech to work with, who would want to leave the services? We should also be careful with gift bearers. Entering into information sharing agreements in a power imbalance can result in paying another nation for our own intellectual property, and developing weapons that will not come online for 10 to 30 years will not solve immediate problems. By the time we get the technology, it is very likely to have been superseded and irrelevant, useless. Our coffers will be drained of funds that could be better used. Making the nation secure to preserve our way of life will not be cheap but essential. At least others demands we spend more. The review of star-ranking officers in the ADF and their civilian equivalents recently announced by the Minister of Defense will hopefully be a breath of fresh air. As service numbers have stagnated, senior ranks have burgeoned. Cross-service, common aspects being amalgamated and placed under more and more senior officers. Done in the interest of reducing duplication, the result has been behemoths disconnected from those they are required to serve. And as for emerging areas like cyber and space, it is better that these important but still small functions are under younger junior officers, better qualified to understand what is going on rather than those with long service whose qualifications and experience are dated. You do not have to be a 4-star to report to a 3-star. Be without fear in the face of your enemies. Be brave and upright so that the people may love you. Speak the truth always, even if it leads to your death. Safeguard the helpless and do no wrong.